patient dies in the emergency room because an emergency room doctor fails to get a specialist involved in time. How can this happen? Stay tuned as I share with you this very important information. Hello, I'm Marcus Boston, and I'm a medical malpractice attorney practicing law here in the state of Maryland. And I would like to talk with you today about emergency room malpractice. Now, what you've got to understand is one of the main roles of an emergency room doctor is to stabilize the patient. And when a specialist needs to be brought in, that emergency room doctor has to go ahead and get that specialist involved as soon as possible. Now, what I'm talking to you about today is a case study that I was reviewing. And what happened in this particular case is that a husband was at his house and he was going down to the basement. And on his way down to the basement, he fell and hit his head. And his wife, she heard the commotion, she heard the fall, and she runs down to the basement to see what's going on. She sees that her husband is laying down on the floor. He's unresponsive, he's not moving. So what does she do? She goes and she calls the paramedics immediately. When the paramedics get there, they see that the patient is still, he's on the ground, and that he's unconscious. As a matter of fact, he's been unconscious now for about 8 minutes. Well, they rush him to the emergency room. And on the way to the emergency room, what they notice is that he begins to gain consciousness a little bit, but he's still disoriented. He still has blood coming out of his nose, and he has an injury to his wrist. The paramedics relay all of this very important information to the emergency room doctor. And the emergency room doctor does a physical examination of the patient, orders an x-ray of the patient's wrist and of the skull to be done. Also, the emergency room doctor tests the patient's reflexes, and the doctor determines that the patient's reflexes are okay. But when he does a light test in the patient's pupils, he learns that the patient's pupils or the eyes do not react at all to any of the light. The emergency room doctor calls the on-call orthopedic doctor about the injury to the patient's wrist. But here's what a critical mistake is made. The emergency room doctor fails to get on the phone and contact the neurologist. Well, we're going to fast forward in time about an hour and a half after the patient had reached the emergency room. The patient is now in with the orthopedic doctor, and that doctor is treating the patient for the wrist injury. After this procedure is done, the emergency room doctor orders that the patient be sent to intensive care so that they can monitor the patient's head injury. But as time goes on, what we learn is that the patient begins to get combative while in intensive care. We learn that the patient is beginning to have delusions. We learn that the patient is now beginning to feel nauseous and beginning to vomit. Well, I'm going to fast forward more time, and this time it's about 6 hours after the patient was first admitted to the hospital that a neurologist was brought in. Now, in a wrongful death case, because what happened is unfortunately the patient died while at the hospital. In a wrongful death case, the plaintiff, the person bringing the lawsuit, had their experts to look at the actions of the emergency room doctor. And in this particular case, the experts concluded that the emergency room doctor should have got the neurologist involved immediately, especially given what happened to the patient in this case. Now, why am I sharing this story with you today? Because if you are watching this video right now, more than likely you have suffered an injury in an emergency room somewhere here in Maryland. You may be watching this video right now because your loved one died in an emergency room here in Maryland. And now you're wondering, was this because your emergency room doctor did not consult with a specialist in time? Well, if you have these questions and these concerns, this is what I invite you to do. It costs you absolutely nothing to take this action. Pick up the phone and give me a call. I can be reached at 301-850-4832. Or if you prefer, send me an email to medicalinjury@bostonlawllc.com. I answer medical malpractice questions like yours all the time, and I will be glad to listen to your story. If you're like a lot of people who contact us, right now you're more than likely confused about this process. You're wondering, what should you do? How does this work? Go ahead and call me. By calling me and allowing me to explain this process to you, that will go a long ways in helping decrease the worry that you may be exhibiting or you may be going through right now because of this process. All right, guys, that's going to be it for today's quick educational video. Again, I'm Marcus Boston, and I'm one of the medical malpractice attorneys here at Boston Law Group, LLC, and we will see you next time. Guys, take care and enjoy the rest of your day.